New car versus wealth.
Okay, I'll admit that might have been a bit dramatic. But in all honesty, in today's video, I want to go over 3 ways that a car's true cost is much higher than just the sticker price. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give some number-based scenarios to really give us a clear picture. So with that being said, let's jump right into the first way, which is depreciation. The definition of depreciation is a reduction in value of an asset over time, due in particular to wear and tear. And this happens basically on a daily basis in our lives on a very small scale. If you buy an ice cream cone and it melts, obviously it's not worth the same amount. If you buy a pack of gum, you chew it up, you can't return it to the store for the same value. If you buy toilet paper, well, I think you get the picture. Okay, so the depreciation might not be such a big deal when we're buying things like ice cream and bubble gum. But when we apply it to a large purchase like a new vehicle, it absolutely has long-term effects on our wealth building. So if we look at this chart made by Credit Karma, talking about the average depreciation of a vehicle, we see that the minute you drive the car off the lot, you lose 10% of that vehicle's value. So if you bought a $40,000 vehicle, you lose $4,000 just leaving the parking lot. That matters. And it goes on. After the first year, you lose an additional 20%. From years 2 to 4, you lose 15% each year for the next couple of years. And then at year 5, you're down 60%. And what makes this even worse is that a lot of times you still haven't paid off your loan because you had a 5+ year loan on this vehicle. And this is how people end up upside down. The second way that a car is going to cost you more than just the sticker price is the fact that you're taking out a loan, and attached to that loan is an interest rate. There's a quote from Albert Einstein where he says that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So unfortunately, if you're taking out a loan with an interest rate to buy this car, you are the latter part of this quote. Okay, so the third and final way that we're going to talk about today that buying a new car is really detrimental to your overall wealth building and is going to cost you way more than what you see on that sticker is opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is a little more hidden. So to try to bring it into plain view, we're going to give the scenario that I mentioned we're going to do at the beginning of the video. So we're going to take, on one hand, someone that buys the car, and we're going to use national averages for this. So the national price of a car, the loan term agreements, and the monthly payments. And on the other hand, we're going to see what happens if you take that same amount of money for the same amount of time and invest it into something like the S&P 500. And we're going to use average returns for that as well. And then we're going to see after I think it's five years and 7 months, where each individual would end up. Okay, so here we see from bankrate.com the averages for buying a new car. So the average monthly car payment is $735. That's insane. The loan amount is $40,634. The interest rate, 7.18, which is also crazy. And the loan term is 67.62 months. So when I do the math on this in a minute, I'm going to round the 67.62 months down to 67 just to make it easier. And everything else should stay the same. That's just going to bump the payment up to, I think, $738. Okay, so here we have all the numbers plugged in. We have the total of the car, which is $40,634. And just quick disclaimer, we're not including like sales tax or anything like that because that varies state to state. And I'm not going to do 50 of these. Interest rate is 7.18. Loan term is 5 years and 7 months. And here we see the numbers. So our monthly payment is $738. Our total payment is $49,441. So you see that's already significantly higher than just the sticker price we saw, $40,634. And that's because this next line of total interest, $8,807 that we paid just in interest. So that money didn't benefit us in any way, shape, or form. We have nothing to show for that. That's just the cost of getting the loan. Annual payment, $8,855. So the takeaway here, $8,800 is gone in interest, and our total payment is actually $49,000 instead of $40,000. Okay, so in scenario 1, we bought the car using national averages So after 5 years and 7 months, we spent $49,000. Now we got to remember, the car is still worth something. It's had about 60% depreciation. So let's look over here. We're left with right at $17,000. So we spent $49,000 and we have a value of $17,000 after 5 years and 7 months. Okay, so that brings us to scenario number 2. And in scenario 2, we're going to forego buying the new car and paying interest to someone else. And instead, we're going to invest that same amount of money for the same amount of time into the S&P 500 and see where we end up in 5.7 years. So if we look at this article from Investopia, we see that the S&P 500 has historically returned 10.26%. Now, anytime I run these kind of numbers, I like to be super conservative. So we're going to go with 7% and see where we end up. Okay, so here we have the monthly deposit, which is the same as we were paying for the car, $738. The same amount of time, 67 months. And the annual interest rate, like we said, we knocked it down to be conservative, 7%. Total principal is $49,446, which is about the same we would have paid for the car. Interest amount that came to us, not that we paid to someone else, is $10,804 for a maturity value of $60,250 that belongs to us after 5.7 years. Okay, so in scenario 1, we buy the car, and after 5 years and 7 months, we're left with a value of about $17,000. In scenario 2, we invest the money instead, we get the benefit of interest, and we end up with right around $60,000. Pretty big difference. But if that's not enough, let's consider for a moment, what if we leave the $60,000, leave it alone, don't touch it, leave it invested, and let it grow for retirement? Okay, so let's take a look at what happens to this initial investment of $60,250, depending on how far out you are from retirement and what your rate of return is. So if you're 10 years out and you get the modest returns we talked about, 7%, you end up with $121,000. That alone is huge. If you're lucky, though, $163,000. If you're 20 years out from retirement, $244,000 to almost $500,000 at $445,000 for 10% returns. If you're 30 years out, so if you do this in your 20s or even early 30s, $491,000 if you have modest 7% returns. If you're lucky, you break $1 million by this one decision. That is huge. Please don't misunderstand me here, okay? I love cars. And honestly, that's been one of my struggles is not buying a new car. But when I look at the numbers of what a car is actually going to cost, there's no way, it's not even consideration. I don't even consider it anymore. And I hope this video just brought that same insight to you. If you want to buy a car and make that decision and that's what you value, that's fine. Just know the true cost of it is not just the sticker price. So I hope this video was helpful. If so, leave me a comment if you've bought a new car and you regret it, or if you're happy that you made the decision, or if you buy an old beater like I did for the longest time. Let me know. All right, see you next week.